How do you fight back when the parents who ignored you your whole life suddenly try to sue you for the inheritance your grandfather left you? How do you stay calm when they call you a thief in front of a judge who knows more about you than they ever did? This is how I went from the quiet, replaceable son to the man who walked out of that courtroom while their whole plan burned down in their hands. Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible stories. My name is Alex Rivera, and my story really started on the day we put my grandfather in the ground. The sky was clear and bright, the kind of blue people usually like. I remember thinking it should have been gray instead. Manuel, my grandfather, hated hot days. He used to joke that the sun made his bones feel like old wood. Now the sun was shining straight down on the black box that held him, and I just stood there, sweating in a suit that felt one size too small. There were not many people at the graveside. A few old men from his construction days, 2 former tenants from one of his small buildings, our neighbor from next door, Mrs. Vega, holding a tissue and staring at the ground. On the other side of the hole stood my parents, Carlos and Linda, dressed in their best clothes for the first time in months. I watched my father check his watch more than he watched the coffin. My mother kept adjusting her sunglasses and her hair, even though the wind was barely moving. She glanced at the small crowd with a tight smile that looked more like she was working an event than saying goodbye to her own father. Someone from the church said a few words. I tried to listen, but my thoughts kept drifting. I saw flashes of Manuel in my head. Him standing in the kitchen in his old work jacket. Him falling asleep in front of the TV. Him sitting at the table going through bills while I made him tea. I felt the hard lump in my throat, but no tears came. I was too tired even for that. When the service ended, people started to drift away in small groups. A few of them came up to me and said they were sorry. They told me my grandfather talked about me a lot. They told me he was proud of me. I nodded and thanked them. I did not know what else to say. My mother came up to me after that, clicking toward me in high heels that sank a little into the grass. She did not hug me. She never really did. She just told me in a flat voice that there was still a lot of paperwork to deal with and that I should not forget about it. She brushed off the years I had spent in that house, the nights I had woken up to give him medicine, the mornings I had taken him to appointments while she posted photos from brunch with her friends. My father put a hand on my shoulder, firm and heavy. He did not look at me for long. He was already scanning who else was still around. He told me I should come back to the house because everyone was heading there. He said people would expect to see the family together. When he said family, I knew he meant him and my mother, and I was just a piece of the picture. We all walked back to our cars. I took one last look at the lowered coffin. It felt wrong to leave him there and go listen to my parents play hosts. But I also knew that this was the last thing I could do for him in this moment. So I got in my car and followed the line back to their neighborhood. Their house looked like it always did. Perfect lawn, fresh paint, big front door with a wreath that changed with the season. Inside, it smelled like some kind of strong perfume and reheated food. Relatives and church friends were already gathered in the living room and kitchen. Voices and laughter bounced off the walls. My mother moved through the crowd like she was at a party. She hugged people, thanked them for coming, made sure everyone saw the framed black and white photo of her and Manuel on the entry table. In the picture, she was young and smiling, holding his arm. Anyone who did not know us would think she had always been by his side. My father stood in the center of the living room, telling stories louder than anyone else. Most of them were not about Manuel. They were about his own plans, his old businesses, his big dreams. He mentioned how hard life had been and how he had never really caught a break. He kept saying that now, with Manuel gone, things might finally change for the better. I stayed close to the wall, a plate of food in my hand that I did not really taste. People came up to me sometimes. They told me again that they were sorry. They said my grandfather had been a good man. Some of them added that my parents must be relieved that his estate would help them now. They said it in a way that made it sound obvious, like this was something everyone accepted as fact. One uncle clapped me on the back and joked that my parents would finally see real money in this family. He laughed as if we were all in on the same joke. I just nodded. I did not bother to explain that my grandfather had not left anything to my parents. Not one penny. He had left everything to me. I had found out a week before he died. Manuel had asked me to drive him to a small office downtown. He wore his good shirt and a tired smile. The lawyer there, Priya, had talked us through the documents. Manuel had made his choices long before that visit, but this was the final review. He signed with a shaking hand, and I watched in silence. Later, when we were alone, he told me that this was not about money. He said it was about making sure the person who had actually been there for him did not get steamrolled later. Now, standing in my parents' house, I understood exactly what he meant. After people ate, they gathered in the dining room. There was not enough space for everyone to sit, so some just leaned against walls and door frames. Someone brought up the will. It was my aunt, I think. She asked when my mother would be going to the lawyer to see what Manuel had left. Everyone turned to look at my mother. She smiled with her chin up and said she would handle it soon. She said, of course, her father would want to make sure she and Carlos were taken care of. She added that she was sure there would be something for me, because it was only fair. The way she said something made it sound small, like a tip. My father laughed and told the room that my mother had already started to plan how they would finally fix the kitchen and pay off some debts. He patted my shoulder again and said I would not have to worry about Manuel's house anymore, because they would take that off my hands. He said it in a light tone, as if he was doing me a favor. I felt heat rise in my chest, but I kept my voice level when I said that Manuel had already seen a lawyer. My mother turned to me sharply. The room got a little quieter. I said it calmly, almost like I was reading a memo, that everything had already been handled before his death. My father frowned and asked what I meant by that. I told him that the will had already been read to me and that there would be an official copy sent out soon. I did not give full details. I just said that Manuel had made his wishes very clear. My mother's smile froze. She asked me if I meant that I already knew what was in the will. There was a sharp edge in her voice now. I said yes. I added that our lawyer, Priya, had gone over it with Manuel and me. I did not mention the part where Manuel had specifically told Priya that he did not trust his daughter or son-in-law with money anymore. People around us were watching now. Some of them tried to act like they were not, staring down at their plates or phones. My uncle, the same one who had joked before, asked if that meant Manuel had left things in some kind of trust. He called it estate stuff in a clumsy way. I took a breath and said that Manuel had left his estate to me. I kept my tone flat on purpose. I did not brag, I did not apologize. I simply stated the fact. For a few seconds there was silence. Then people started to shift, cough, whisper. My father asked if I meant the house. My mother asked if I meant everything. I said yes to both. My chest felt tight, but my voice did not shake. I could see the anger hit my mother in stages. First confusion, then disbelief, then something deeper. She asked how her own father could skip over her like that. She said she had always been there for him. I thought of all the nights she had not been there, but I did not say it out loud. It would not have changed anything. My father's face turned red. He said it did not make sense. He said someone must have influenced Manuel. He did not use the word brainwashed, but he did not have to. It hung in the air anyway. He hinted that old people can be confused, that they can be pushed, that things can be signed without full understanding. I stayed calm and said that Manuel had been tested for his mental state before he signed anything. I said the doctors had cleared him. I said he knew exactly what he was doing. My voice sounded strange, even to me, detached, like I was talking about someone else's family. My mother's friends gathered closer to her, and I saw them put hands on her shoulders and whisper things in her ear. Some looked at me like I had pulled a trick. Others looked away, not wanting to choose sides too early. The rest of the afternoon was a blur. The laughter in the house was not as free anymore. The air felt heavier. People came up to me with careful, neutral faces and said that wills could always be reviewed, that lawyers sometimes made mistakes, that there were always options. They did not say out loud what they meant. I could hear it anyway. I helped clean up some plates just to have something to do with my hands. My mother barely spoke to me. When she needed something moved or carried, she acted like I was hired help, not her son. My father avoided direct eye contact, but I could feel his anger from across the room. By the time the sun started to go down, most people had left. The house was quiet, with only a few dishes left in the sink and the smell of food fading. I told my parents I was heading out. My father just grunted. My mother said in a cold voice that we would need to talk about this properly later. She said we would need to make sure things were fair. I did not answer. I knew her idea of fair, and Manuel's idea of fair had never been the same. Outside, the air felt cooler. I walked to my car with slow steps, my legs suddenly heavy. My head was buzzing from the pressure of the day and from holding back everything I wanted to yell. I sat down behind the wheel and closed the door. For a moment, I just sat there, hands on the steering wheel, breathing. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out and saw a new message from Priya. She wanted to meet with me first thing Monday morning, before my parents did something stupid. I looked up through the windshield and saw my mother through the front window of the house, laughing at something one of her friends had just said and waving her arms as if she was already planning something. That was the moment I knew the funeral was over, but the fight for my grandfather's choices had only just started. That night after the funeral, when I finally got back to my apartment, the silence hit me first. I live in a small one-bedroom place. Nothing special. A gray couch, a small table, a cheap TV on a stand I built myself. My desk sits in one corner of the living room with my work laptop and an older monitor on it. The room still smelled faintly like the coffee I had made early that morning before putting on the suit and driving to the cemetery. I dropped my keys in the bowl by the door and stood there for a moment, not moving. My body felt heavy, like someone had hung weight plates on my arms and shoulders. It was not just the day. It was years. Years that had led to that grave and that strange gathering at my parents' house. I pulled off my tie, took off the jacket, and sat down on the couch. My eyes landed on a framed photo on the shelf. It was Manuel and me on a fishing pier from years ago. I looked younger and thinner, with a bad haircut. He stood next to me in his old cap, holding up a fish with a proud look on his face. In the picture, his hand was resting lightly on my shoulder. It always looked more like a steady anchor than a casual touch. Staring at that photo pulled me back. When I was a kid, Manuel's house had been my second home long before it became my only one. My parents liked to describe themselves as hustlers. They said they were always chasing opportunities. In practice, that meant a lot of late nights out, a lot of closed doors, and a lot of empty promises. They started leaving me at Manuel's place when I was about 10. At first, it was just some evenings. They said they had meetings or events. They would drop me off with a rushed smile and say that they would be back later. Later often became very late or the next morning. Manuel never complained. He would sit me at the table, warm up some food, and ask about school in his slow, steady way. He worked most of his life in construction and small rentals. His hands were rough and scarred from decades of that work. But his voice was always calm. He liked to say that buildings and people both needed steady care if you wanted them to stand. As I grew up, it became normal that I kept clothes at his place. Some nights I would fall asleep on his couch with the TV on. Other nights, he would tell me to take the small spare bedroom because it was too late for me to go home. He would call my parents and inform them, in his patient tone, where I was. They always said it was fine. Sometimes they did not even answer. At school events, Manuel was the one who showed up most often. He took time off work to sit in those crowded gyms and small auditoriums. He did not clap very loudly, but his eyes always found me in the crowd. My parents liked to talk about how hard they worked for the family, but most of the time they were not really there. When they did come by Manuel's house, it usually had a reason. My father would arrive, full of energy, talking about a new business idea. My mother would smile and say they were going through a hard time. They would sit at Manuel's table and show him some papers, some numbers, some plans. They often left with a check. I remember one night clearly. I was about 16. I was sitting at the kitchen table doing homework while Manuel listened to my parents talk about a sure-thing investment. My father was excited. My mother leaned forward, nodding and agreeing. Manuel looked tired. He told them softly that he did not like debt and fast promises. He said he would help a little, but he would not put everything at risk. My parents smiled on the outside, but on the drive home I heard them complain that he was being cheap. They said he had forgotten who would take care of him when he got old. They never saw the way that promise reversed over time. I got into computers partly by accident. Manuel bought an old desktop from a closing office and set it up in the spare room. He said it might help with school. I took it apart and put it back together a few times. I started reading about how systems worked, how networks worked, how data could be protected or stolen. By the time I finished high school, I knew more about those things than any teacher I had. Manuel pushed me to apply to colleges. My parents said they were proud, but they did not help with forms or deadlines. Manuel sat with me at the kitchen table and walked through financial aid paperwork. He told me that he had not gone to college himself, but he believed in learning that helped you stand on your own 2 feet. When I left for university, Manuel gave me a small envelope with savings he had put aside. He said it was not much, but that it would help with books. He also told me that I always had a room in his house if I needed it. My parents told me that I should remember where I came from if I ever made money. The way they said it made it sound like they were planting a flag on a future they had no part in building. I studied computer science and then specialized in security. I liked the logic of it. I liked how evidence and patterns could tell stories that people tried to hide. After graduation, I got a job with a small cybersecurity firm. We worked with local businesses and sometimes with law enforcement. I learned how to pull hidden data from drives, how to check if systems had been tampered with, how to explain complex things in simple terms. In my mid-20s, Manuel had a small stroke. I got the call from Mrs. Vega, the neighbor, while I was at the office. She told me that Manuel had suddenly dropped a glass in the kitchen and his speech sounded off. She called emergency services and then called me. My parents were out of town. They had posted photos from some resort earlier that day. When I reached the hospital, Manuel looked small in the bed, but still aware. The doctors talked about risk, about the need for someone to keep a close eye on him at home. Manuel looked at me and did not even need to ask. I already knew what I was going to do. I talked to my boss about moving to remote work. The company had some flexibility for that, especially because of the kind of tasks I did. It took some negotiation, and I took a pay cut, but I made it work. I moved into Manuel's old craftsman house full-time. The house was not fancy, creaking floors, old windows, narrow hallways. But it was solid. Manuel built parts of it himself years ago. He knew every pipe and wire in the walls. After the stroke, the house became our whole world. The new routine was simple and hard at the same time. I woke up early to help Manuel with breakfast and medication. I drove him to physical therapy and checkups. Between appointments and meals, I worked on my laptop at the small table by the front window, connected to client systems, running tests, writing reports. In the evenings, I cooked simple meals and sat with him while he watched TV. My parents did not move in to help. They did not even offer. They said they were busy trying to stabilize their finances. They said it was wonderful that I could work from anywhere and be there. Sometimes they visited, but not often. When they did come, they stayed for an hour, maybe 2. They took photos with Manuel to post online and wrote long captions about how family was everything. They brought cheap takeout and left most of the dishes in the sink. Over time, I started writing things down. At first, it was only for myself. I kept a notebook near the kitchen. I wrote what time Manuel took his pills, when we had appointments, how he felt that day. Later, I moved those notes to a spreadsheet on my laptop. It was easier to sort, easier to search. I added dates and times and details. When a nurse came by, I wrote it down. When my parents visited, I noted it. I also handled more of Manuel's paperwork. He asked me to sit with him as he paid bills. He told me that he wanted me to understand everything. I set up online banking for him, with him watching each step. He did not like the idea at first, but once he saw how easy it was to track expenses, he smiled and said that even an old man could learn new tricks. My parents still came around mostly when they needed help. They would ask Manuel if he could lend them money for a new project or to cover a gap. Sometimes he agreed, sometimes he refused. The more he said no, the less often they came by. A few years into this routine, Manuel told me that he wanted to review his will. He said he had not looked at it in a long time and that life had changed. He asked if I could help him find a good lawyer. I thought about some of the cases I had worked touched indirectly, where people had tried to cheat seniors. I told him I knew a name. Priya Shah had hired my firm once for a small digital piece in an estate dispute. She had been focused and precise, and she had talked to me like a colleague, not like some IT guy in the corner. I still had her contact information. I called her office and explained that my grandfather wanted to update his documents. She set a time. I arranged to drive Manuel there. The meeting in her office was calm and clear. Priya spoke directly to Manuel, not through me. She asked him about his life, his assets, his wishes. She also asked about his health and if he felt any pressure from anyone. Manuel told her that he was fine mentally, just slower physically, and that the only pressure he felt was from people who saw him more as a bank than as family. He did not look at me when he said that. He did not need to. Priya explained how wills, trusts, and powers of attorney worked. She spoke plainly without legal show. Manuel listened, nodded, and then told her that he wanted to make sure the person who had actually been there would not get pushed aside after he was gone. He said he wanted things in writing in a way no one could twist. It took a few meetings, medical evaluations, forms, signatures, witnesses. I sat on the side each time, only speaking when Priya asked me factual questions, like about schedules or details of the house. When all the papers were finally signed, Manuel looked relieved. On the drive home, he told me that life had taught him that people showed their true values when money was on the table. He said he trusted me because I had been there when there was no money involved. The last year of his life was hard. He got weaker. Some days his mind was sharp, and we talked for hours. Other days he was quiet and tired. Through all of it, I kept the same routine: care, work, notes. I updated the logs on my computer every night. I backed up everything on a small encrypted drive. It was a habit from my job, but it also gave me some control in a situation that often felt like it was slipping away. When Manuel finally died, it felt like a floor had dropped out from under me. The house seemed too quiet. The routines suddenly stopped. My parents rushed in, full of tears for 2 days, then moved the center of activity back to their house, where the funeral arrangements and social details could be displayed. Now, sitting on my couch in my apartment after that long day, I opened my laptop. The screen lit up my tired face. My calendar sat open. I saw old reminders, notes about Manuel's rehab sessions, notes about trust reviews with Priya, reminders to back up care logs. I scrolled past them and saw new entries. Priya had already scheduled a follow-up meeting about the estate. I had also set my own reminder to organize documents before that. As I stared at the screen, my phone vibrated on the table. I picked it up and saw a notification from the family group chat. My mother had sent a long message. She wrote that we would talk soon about how I was going to share the inheritance and that I should not be selfish. She added that parents came first and that she was sure I understood that. A few relatives had already reacted with thumbs-up emojis and comments about how family had to stick together. I felt my chest tighten, but my hands stayed steady as I locked the screen and set the phone down. At that point, they still thought I was someone who could be pushed into anything with enough guilt. They had no idea what Manuel had really done, how carefully he had planned, or how much I had kept track of while they were busy chasing opportunities. The next day, I drove back to my parents' house because my mother insisted we talk like adults. That was how she phrased it in her message. She said we needed to clear the air and make a plan before things got awkward with the rest of the family. I already knew what that meant. To her, talking like adults usually meant her and my father speaking and me listening. The house looked the same as always when I pulled up. Perfect grass, trimmed bushes, a small flag by the driveway. It was the same scene I had walked into countless times as a kid, back when I thought adults actually knew what they were doing. Inside, the air smelled like coffee and something sweet. My mother was at the dining table, a pile of papers spread around her. My father stood by the kitchen counter with a mug in his hand, staring at his phone. "You're late," my mother said as soon as she saw me, even though I was right on time. I sat down across from her. She did not offer me coffee. She slid a sheet of paper toward me like a manager calling in an employee. "I've been thinking about how to handle your grandfather's estate," she said. "We want to be fair." My father nodded like a backup singer. "We're not trying to cheat you, son," he added. "We just need to make sure this is done properly." I looked at the paper she had pushed at me. It was not an actual legal document. It was a rough list written in her neat handwriting. House, rental units, investments, savings. Next to each item she had written percentages. Next to most of them was a large number marked us. Next to a few was a smaller one marked you. She started to explain her plan. She said it only made sense that she and my father would receive most of the inheritance because they were the older generation and had real responsibilities. She said I was young, I could always make more money later. She called what she was offering me a generous share. I listened until she finished. Then I said in a calm voice that Manuel had already decided how he wanted his estate handled, and that he had done it with a lawyer. I told her that it was not up to us to redraw his choices on a piece of paper at the dining table. Her back stiffened. "You mean you and that lawyer," she said. "You went behind our backs and did this." I reminded her that Manuel was her father. He was not a child. He had the right to see a lawyer. He had the right to decide what to do with his own property. I could feel my heart beating faster, but I kept my tone flat and steady. My father put his mug down with a louder sound than needed. "Cut the act, Alex," he said. "Do you really expect us to believe he just woke up one day and decided to skip his own daughter? Old people don't think like that. Someone got in his head." He did not say my name like a father talking to his son. He said it like a man talking to someone who had wronged him in business. I looked from one to the other. I thought about all the nights they had been out while I stayed at Manuel's. All the times I had cleaned up, cooked, argued with insurance, managed medication, watched for signs of another stroke. Then I thought about them breezing in once a month with a dessert and leaving before the dishes were dry. "You weren't there," I said quietly. "You visited sometimes, you took pictures, but you weren't there." My mother's eyes flashed. "Excuse me?" she said. "I am his daughter. Don't you dare stand there and tell me I wasn't there." "You weren't," I repeated. My voice did not rise. In a way, that seemed to make it worse. I could see the moment when their hurt turned into something sharper, less honest. My mother leaned back in her chair, folded her arms, and narrowed her eyes. "Fine," she said. "If you want to play this game, we can play it. But let me make one thing clear. Your grandfather did not have the mental clarity to make big decisions near the end. Everyone knows that. If this lawyer put ideas in his head, we can undo them." She said the words mental clarity like she had any idea what his test results had been. She did not. She just knew that saying phrases like that made her sound serious. My father picked up the thread. "We've already spoken to a friend who knows a bit about these things," he said. "He said wills can be challenged if there's manipulation, if someone took advantage." The way he looked at me on that last word told me exactly who he meant. I sat back in my chair and let their accusations hang between us. For a second, I felt something hot rise into my chest, like a wave that wanted to break. Anger, hurt, all of it. But then, just as fast, it dropped back down. What stayed in its place was cold and clear. "Manuel was tested," I said. His doctor signed off on his capacity before he made any changes. He wasn't confused, he was careful. He knew exactly how you act when there is money on the table. My mother stood up so fast her chair scraped the floor. "How dare you?" she said. "How dare you talk to me like that in my own home?" My father stepped closer to the table. "This isn't over," he said. "If you think you can just keep everything and leave us with nothing, you're wrong. We have rights." I stood up slowly. "You can talk to your own lawyer," I said. "Priya knows the documents. You can call her office if you want. But I'm not signing anything you made up on a pad." My mother picked up the paper she had written on, crumpled it, and threw it into the trash. She said that if I wanted to act like a stranger, she would treat me like one. My father told me I should go before he said something he would regret. I left without another word. The air outside felt colder than it was. As I walked to my car, I saw the curtains shift in one of the front windows. Someone was watching, but I did not look back. A week later, I found out just how far they were willing to go. It started at church. I do not go every week, but Manuel liked it when I went with him sometimes. After he died, I went mostly out of habit. It was a small comfort, sitting where we had sometimes sat together. That Sunday, I went alone. I sat near the back. My parents were near the front, surrounded by people they liked to impress. During the service, I kept my eyes on the words in the program. I did not look at them. Afterward, people gathered in the lobby, as they always did. There was coffee, small talk, the usual noise of people catching up. I was turning to leave when I heard my name. I turned around and saw my mother standing with 3 women from her circle. She was talking loudly enough for others to hear. When she saw that I had turned, she did not lower her voice. "It's just heartbreaking," she was telling them. My own father, and yet I had no say. Alex kept him all to himself at that house. We barely even got to see him near the end. And then suddenly there's this will from some lawyer we didn't even know he had. One of her friends shook her head and said it sounded suspicious. Another asked if I was really getting everything. My mother nodded in a sad, tired way that I knew was an act. "My father was so fragile," she said. "He trusted people too much. I worry that Alex took advantage. When someone depends on you for everything, you can make them sign anything." She did not say the words elder abuse, but she hovered close. Her friends glanced at me, then looked away quickly. One of them gave me a cold, polite smile that did not reach her eyes. My father joined the group and added a few lines about how they were looking into it, legally, because they just wanted what was fair. He mentioned that they had talked to a lawyer who said things like this happen when lonely old people fall under the influence of someone who wants control. The humiliation was not the volume of their words. It was how casual they were. They were not pulling me aside to talk. They were not airing their pain in private. They were building a story in front of everyone, where they were the victims and I was the ungrateful, manipulative grandson. People I had known since I was a kid were nearby, listening. I heard someone whisper the word parasite. I do not know if they meant me or if they were quoting something my parents had said. It did not really matter. I felt something inside me click into place. It was not rage. Rage is hot and wild. This was the opposite. It was cold and steady, like a door closing. I realized in that moment that there was nothing I could say to change their minds or the story they were building. They had chosen their version of events. They had also chosen their battlefield, public opinion, gossip, sympathy. My battlefield was different. I turned and walked out without trying to defend myself. Behind me, I heard my mother say loudly that she just prayed the truth would come out. A few people made soft sounds of agreement. I kept walking. Back at my apartment, I made coffee and sat down at my desk. I opened my laptop. I did not check social media. I did not look at the group chat. I opened my encrypted folders. Years of logs and notes waited for me. Dates, times, names, records of who came to the house and when. Records of doctor visits and letters, screenshots of text messages from my parents that started with, "Sorry, we can't make it," and ended with, "Let us know when there's paperwork to sign." I had stored everything half out of habit and half out of an old, quiet fear that one day someone would try to twist the story. That day had arrived. I created a new folder and named it simply Case. The word felt strange, but also right. I started by copying my care logs for the last 3 years into that folder. Then I added the email threads with Manuel's doctors, the appointment confirmations, the discharge notes. I moved in the calendar invites for our meetings with Priya with dates and times. I included the messages where Manuel had asked me to set things up with her. Next, I plugged in the small USB drive I used for backups. It held the security camera files from Manuel's front porch and living room entrance. I had installed the cameras after a small break-in scare years back. They were basic, but they did their job. They showed who came and who went. I did not watch any clips that afternoon. I just organized them by date. I worked quietly for hours. By the time the sky outside my window started to darken, my new folder was filled with documents, logs, and videos. None of it was dramatic. It was just the record of life as it had actually been. As I leaned back in my chair, tired but strangely calm, there was a knock on my door. I frowned. I was not expecting anyone. When I opened the door, a man in a plain jacket was standing there holding a large envelope. He asked my name. When I said yes, he handed me the envelope and said I had been served. Then he turned and walked away without waiting for a response. I closed the door slowly and looked down at the envelope. On the front, in printed letters, I saw my parents' names listed as petitioners. Under that was my name as respondent. I set it on the table, sat down, and opened it. Inside were pages and pages of legal language. Words like petition, undue influence, financial exploitation. There were lines saying I had isolated Manuel, that I had cut off family contact, that I had pushed him to sign documents that favored me. One phrase stood out: pattern of manipulative control. For a moment, I just stared at that line. Then, very slowly, I felt my breathing even out. The cold clarity that had settled in the church lobby spread through my chest again. I closed the file, stacked the pages neatly, and placed them next to my laptop. Then I reached for my phone and scrolled to Priya's number. When she answered, her voice was calm. I told her about the envelope. I told her about the scene at church. I told her the exact words they had used. She was quiet for a few seconds, then she said we needed to meet as soon as possible. She also asked one simple question. Alex, did you keep records of everything? I looked at the screen of my laptop, at the organized folder named Case, and at the small USB drive lying next to it. Yes, I said. I kept everything. That was the moment I stopped reacting and started preparing. Priya saw me the next afternoon. Her office was on the 10th floor of a glass building downtown, the kind of place my parents liked to point at and say they wanted to end up in someday when I was a kid. I rode the elevator up with the envelope from the process server in my hand and a dull ache behind my eyes. The reception area was quiet. Light gray walls, soft chairs, a plant in the corner that looked too perfect to be real. The receptionist greeted me by name and said Priya was expecting me. She offered water. I said yes, mostly so I would have something to hold. When Priya came out, she looked exactly like I remembered from the meetings with Manuel. Dark hair pulled back, simple suit, calm eyes. She shook my hand and led me into a conference room with a long table and a view of the city. She asked how I was holding up. I said I was tired. There was no point pretending otherwise. I slid the lawsuit envelope across the table. She took out the stack of papers and went through them, page by page. As she read, her expression did not change much, but I saw small things. The slight tightening around her mouth when she reached the accusations. The way her eyes narrowed a little at certain phrases. She told me in a steady voice that my parents were claiming undue influence and financial exploitation. She said they were asking the court to invalidate the will, to give them control of the estate, and to make the estate pay their legal fees. She added that they were painting a picture of me as a manipulative caregiver who cut them off from Manuel. I listened and nodded. None of it surprised me after what I had already heard in the church lobby. Then she asked the same question she had asked on the phone, whether I had kept records. I told her I had. I explained about the care logs, the messages, the emails, the camera footage. I told her how I had organized everything into a folder the night before and backed it up. I also told her, more slowly, that I had not started keeping those records because I expected this. I said it was partly habit from my job and partly a feeling that people would not understand what the last years had really been like. She listened, then said that was good. Not just good, but important. She explained that courts did not work on who sounded more upset in the room. They worked on what could be shown, what could be documented, what could be proven. She asked if I could bring everything to her in a form she and her team could review. I said yes. We agreed that I would prepare copies and bring them in a few days. Before I left, she went over the process again. There would be a response filed to the petition. There would likely be depositions. There would be hearings. She said it might get ugly. Then she added that she had handled cases like this before, where relatives tried to claw back decisions from elders they had ignored when it mattered. I asked her, quietly, if she believed the documents Manuel had signed would stand. She said she could not promise outcomes, but she could say that Manuel had done everything by the book: mental capacity checks, independent legal advice, properly witnessed signatures. She said my parents' case would have to fight against all of that. On my way out, she told me one last thing. She said that if my parents wanted to make this about stories, we would respond with facts. If they wanted to throw dirt, we would answer with timelines. It was not a threat. It was just a description of how she worked. I left her office feeling tired, but a little less lost. Over the next week, my life turned into quiet sorting. I signed up for a short-term desk at a co-working space downtown. My apartment was fine for work, but I wanted a neutral place, somewhere that did not carry memories of Manuel's house or my parents' voices. The co-working space had long tables, shared printers, and the soft hum of other people's keyboards. Nobody knew me there. I liked that. I set up my laptop, plugged in my backup drive, and opened my folders. On the table in front of me, I laid out a notebook and a pen. I made a list of everything I needed to gather: care logs, doctor appointments, medication lists, emails with Manuel's doctors, messages from my parents, calendar entries for visits, screenshots from the security cameras, anything related to the meetings with Priya. Then I started. I copied the care logs for the last 3 years into a new set of files, cleaning up the formatting so someone else could follow them easily. I made sure each entry had a date and time. If Manuel had a bad day, I had written it down. If he had a good day, I had written that too. When my parents visited, I had noted the date and roughly how long they stayed. Next, I went through my email. I filtered for messages from Manuel's doctors and clinics. I downloaded appointment confirmations, lab results, discharge papers. I printed some of them on the co-working printer, the machine humming steadily behind me. Then I turned to my message history with my parents. There were long gaps there, weeks and months where we barely spoke. When they did message, it was often to cancel a visit, to ask for a loan, or to talk about paperwork they wanted Manuel to sign. I took screenshots of the important ones. The text where my mother said they were too busy to come because of a networking event. The one where my father said there was no point in him visiting if Manuel did not want to talk about money. The one where they asked if Manuel had finally decided about changing his will. I did not add comments. I just saved what was already there. The security camera footage took more time. The front porch camera had been running for years. I had set it to record when it detected motion. I opened the folders and watched small clips in quick bursts. A delivery guy dropping off a package, Mrs. Vega arriving with food, nurses coming and going. Sometimes Manuel and I appeared on the screen, moving slowly down the ramp I had installed for him. Visits from my parents showed up less often than I remembered, and I had not remembered many to begin with. I marked those clips and moved them into a separate folder. Most of them were short. They arrived, stayed a little while, then left. In one, my mother stood on the porch and told Manuel that she could not stay long because she had a commitment with her ladies' group. In another, my father said they would talk more once he had sorted a few things out. With his latest project and needed Manuel's advice. When I glanced around the co-working space, people were just working, drinking coffee, staring at their screens. No one knew that the quiet guy in the corner was sorting through years of his life to defend himself from his own parents. A few days later, I took a break from the co-working space to meet with someone at the bank that managed Manuel's trust. The trust officer was a man in his 50s with careful hair and tired eyes. His office was lined with folders and certificates. When I sat down, he greeted me respectfully. He had met Manuel several times. He remembered him as a man who did not like fancy products, just solid plans. He opened a file and went through the basic structure of the trust again. He explained which assets were in it and what the purpose was. He reminded me that Manuel had wanted part of his estate to provide for me, and part of it to support a small scholarship in his name down the line. He hinted, in careful language, that there were safeguards in the trust for situations where someone tried to attack its terms. I asked him what that meant exactly. He said that the trust had conditions related to behavior, that certain actions by potential heirs could affect their rights, but he did not go into detail. He said those things would be discussed fully if the trust came under direct legal challenge. I realized then that Manuel had not just trusted me. He had also anticipated my parents. He had built something that could respond even if he was gone. When I left the bank, I felt a strange mix of sadness and respect. Sadness that he had needed to think that far ahead. Respect that he had done it anyway. Back at the co-working space, I kept working. I organized everything into a clear structure. Medical, financial, communication, video. I added short summaries in a separate document, explaining what each group of files showed in simple words. Meanwhile, my parents kept moving on their own track. I heard about it through the family group chat, which I muted but still checked sometimes, and through a few relatives who called me with awkward voices. My parents were telling everyone that they had hired a strong lawyer. They said this lawyer had told them their case was strong, that elderly people were often pressured by caregivers, that they had a high chance of correcting the situation. One evening, while I was at the co-working space, an email notification popped up from Priya. She had forwarded a message from my parents' attorney, a man named Andrew Blake. In his email, Andrew said his clients were willing to settle early to avoid more painful revelations. He suggested that if I agreed to sign over most of the estate, they would not push for additional penalties. He He wrote that if I refused, they were prepared to show the court a clear pattern of isolation and control. Near the end of the email, he added a line about how juries and judges tended not to look kindly on greedy caregivers who took advantage of vulnerable elders. I read that line twice, then a third time. There was nothing special about the language. It was just the normal pressure talk some lawyers use. But it told me exactly how they all saw me. Not as the tired grandson who had changed bedsheets at midnight and argued with insurance on the phone, but as some shadow figure trying to profit. I replied only to Priya. I told her I was not interested in that kind of settlement. I told her I wanted my grandfather's decisions respected. I also told her I would bring in the organized files the next day. The following week, I sat in her conference room again with boxes and a drive. She and an assistant went through the folders with methodical focus. They asked precise questions, dates, times, who, how often. Sometimes they nodded. Sometimes they made notes. At one point, Priya looked up and said that this was more thorough documentation than many businesses kept. I shrugged and said that old habits die hard. She said in this case, those habits might save me. Before I left, she told me there would be a scheduling hearing soon. The court would set dates and assign a judge officially. She would let me know as soon as she heard. A few days later, as I was back at my apartment for once, my phone buzzed on the coffee table while I was making tea in the kitchen. I wiped my hands on a towel and picked it up. It was a message from Priya. She wrote that the court had set a hearing date. Then she added the judge's name, Judge Robert Keller. I stared at the screen for a moment, then felt a small jolt of recognition. I knew that name. I had seen it on orders and case files before. I had also stood in his courtroom once, not as a defendant, but as an expert. Last year, I had testified in a case where an elderly woman had been tricked by a distant relative into signing over control of her accounts. My digital work had helped uncover messages and transactions that proved the fraud. Judge Keller had presided over that case. He had listened carefully, asked clear questions, and, at the end, spoken sharply to the people who had tried to steal from someone who trusted them. Now he would be the one hearing my parents' claims about me. For the first time since the envelope from the process server landed on my table, I felt the balance shift a few degrees back toward me. Not because I expected special treatment, but because I knew at least one person in that room would understand the language of evidence. I put the phone down slowly and looked at the neat rows of binders on my desk and the small USB drive next to them. The story my parents were telling was loud, mine was quiet, but mine had dates, times, and facts, and soon all of it would be laid out under oath. The days after I learned about Judge Keller moved in a strange, slow way. On the surface, my life looked normal. I still went to the co-working space. I still answered emails from clients and checked logs on remote systems. I still bought groceries and washed dishes and tried to sleep at night. But under all of that, there was a quiet, steady line of preparation running through everything. Priya called me to her office again at the end of that week. She said we needed to finalize our side before the first big hearing. I took the usual elevator up, carrying my backpack with the binders and the USB drive inside. My hands did not shake, but I could feel a dull pressure behind my ribs. In the conference room, Priya had already spread some papers out on the table. She told me that these were the last forms we needed to sign before we stepped into court. There were lists of witnesses, lists of exhibits, and a response to the petition my parents had filed. She did not read every word out loud, but she walked me through the structure. She said that we were not just defending the will, we were defending Manuel's right to make decisions about his own life. She slid the papers to me one by one. I read enough to understand the general idea, then signed where she indicated. Each signature felt like placing a small stone in a wall, piece by piece. Not dramatic, just necessary. She also told me that my parents' lawyer had sent another message. He had suggested again that we could settle this quietly if I agreed to sign over most of the estate. She said that he had used the phrase that this would be best for the family. She asked if I had changed my mind. I told her that I had not. I said that if I gave in now, people like my parents would never stop doing this to others. I added that Manuel had trusted the system enough to set everything up with care, and that the least I could do was trust it long enough to see this through. She listened and nodded, and I could see that she accepted that answer. Before I left, she reminded me that the hearing might be emotional and messy, but that my job in that room would be simple. Tell the truth, stay calm, and let the evidence do the heavy lifting. She said that the record was our friend, whether my parents liked it or not. A few days before the hearing date, my parents reached out one more time on their own. They asked me to meet them for dinner. My mother wrote in the message that it would be a chance to speak privately, without lawyers, and to avoid turning this into a public disaster. She added that we were still family, and that we should at least try to fix things between us. I stared at the message for a long time. Part of me wanted to ignore it. Another part knew that meeting them would change nothing, but might make certain things clear in my own mind. In the end, I replied that I would come. We met at a family chain restaurant near their neighborhood, the kind of place with bright lights, sticky tables, and a screen above the bar showing a sports game with the sound off. When I walked in, they were already seated in a booth near the back. They both looked dressed for a casual night out, not for a hard talk. My father started by saying that this whole situation had gotten out of hand. He said that he did not want to drag our family name through court if we could avoid it. My mother nodded and said that she was willing to make sacrifices to keep the peace. Then she slid a piece of paper across the table. On it, she had written another breakdown. This one looked cleaner than the rough list from their dining table, but carried the same idea. They would receive most of the estate. I would get a small part. In return, they would drop the lawsuit. She said that this would show the court and the community that we were united and mature. They both spoke as if they were being generous. My father said that this was my chance to prove that I was not just after money. My mother said that people would judge me harshly if I forced my own parents into a courtroom. She used words like shame and embarrassment, as if those should scare me more than losing everything Manuel had worked for. I listened without interrupting. When they finally stopped, I told them in a quiet voice that I was not signing anything. I said that Manuel had made his choices freely, with a clear mind and proper advice. I said that trying to undo his decisions for their benefit was exactly the behavior that had pushed him to protect me in the first place. My mother's face hardened. She said that if I walked away from this offer, I should not come crying later when things went badly for me. My father said that no judge would believe someone like me over parents who only wanted what was fair. He added that their lawyer was confident and that I was playing a dangerous game. I did not argue. I just repeated that I would see them in court and that I hoped, for their sake, they had told their lawyer the whole truth. Then I stood up and left. Behind me, I could sense their anger like heat. But as I stepped out into the cooler night air, I felt strangely light. They had laid out their last attempt to control the story without witnesses. I had said no. The night before the hearing, I stayed home. I turned off my work notifications and set my phone to silent, except for calls from Priya. I spread my binders out on the coffee table, medical notes, care logs, message printouts, and a slim folder with copies of Manuel's basic estate documents. The USB drive sat on the table like a small dark stone. I did not need to review every detail again. Priya and her team had already gone through everything carefully. Still, I flipped through the pages, more to settle my mind than to learn anything new. I traced dates with my finger. I remembered specific days, the time Manuel fell and laughed it off, the day he signed the papers with a tired smile, the afternoon my parents had promised to visit and never showed up. Later, I ironed the shirt I planned to wear and checked that my suit was clean and simple. I did not want to look flashy. I wanted to look like myself, someone who worked quietly and took things seriously. I polished my shoes. I laid everything out on a chair so that the morning would be easier. Before going to bed, I checked my phone. There was a short message from Priya. She wrote that tomorrow we would stay calm, present the truth, and let the record speak. She added that I was more prepared than most people who ever walked into a courtroom. I stared at those words for a moment, then put the phone face down. Sleep came in small pieces that night. When my alarm finally rang, it felt like I had never really rested, but also like my mind was oddly clear. I got dressed slowly, ate a light breakfast, and double-checked that my backpack held everything I needed: the binders, the USB drive, a notebook, a pen. On the drive to the courthouse, the city looked normal. People walked dogs, waited for buses, checked their phones at crosswalks. No one knew that my parents and I were about to stand in front of a judge to argue over the life of a man who was no longer there to speak. The courthouse was a tall, pale building with wide steps and heavy doors. Inside, it smelled like old paper and cleaning fluid. Security checked my bag and passed it back to me. I followed the signs up to the floor where the probate courtrooms were located. The lobby outside the courtroom was open and bright, with benches along the walls. I saw Priya standing near one of them, talking quietly to another lawyer from her firm. She saw me and gave a small nod. I walked over and she asked if I was ready. I told her that as ready as I could be would have to be enough. Across the lobby, near the far wall, I saw my parents. They were standing with a man in a dark suit who I guessed was Andrew Blake. My mother was talking animatedly, her hands moving as she spoke. My father laughed at something Andrew said. All three of them glanced my way at one point. My mother looked at me with that same mix of anger and disbelief I had seen before. My father gave me a look that said he still expected to win. Andrew's expression was hard to read, but there was a hint of confidence there, the kind of easy calm that people get when they think they know how things will go. I did not walk over to them. I stayed by Priya's side. We went over the basic order of events one more time. She reminded me that I might not even need to speak very much in this first hearing. She said that even if things came up unexpectedly, we would handle them step by step. As we waited, other people filled the lobby. Some were there for different cases. There were families arguing in low voices, lawyers checking files, a few people sitting alone with scared eyes. A clerk came out of a side door now and then to call other cases. Each time, the group for that case would stand and disappear into a courtroom. After what felt like a long time, but was probably only minutes, a clerk stepped out from the door to our assigned courtroom. She held a clipboard and called out the case name. Hearing my own last name spoken in that clear, official tone made the whole situation feel suddenly more real. My parents stepped forward with Andrew. My mother brushed past me without a word, then turned her head slightly and rolled her eyes. She said, in a sharp whisper meant for me but loud enough for others to hear, that this would be over quickly and that I had only made it harder on myself. I did not answer. I just adjusted my grip on my backpack strap and walked toward the open door. Inside the courtroom, at the front, I could already see the judge's bench. Judge Keller was taking his seat, looking down at the file in front of him as he adjusted his glasses. He looked up as we started to enter, and for a brief second, his eyes paused on me with a small flicker of recognition. My mother was still talking under her breath, so sure of how the next hour would go. She had no idea that in a few moments the room she counted on to crush me would turn out to be the place where everything started to shift. We took our seats at the front, my parents on one side with Andrew, me with Priya on the other. The clerk called the case, papers rustled, the room settled. Judge Keller opened the file, scanned the first page, then looked up. His eyes went from my parents to me, then back to the papers. He frowned slightly, leaned closer, and read something again. Then he looked straight at me. "Mr. Rivera," he said, his voice carrying in the quiet room. "Are you the same Alex Rivera who testified as the digital forensics expert in the Hendricks Elder fraud case last year?" My parents turned their heads so fast I heard my mother's bracelet clink. "Yes, Your Honor," I said. My voice sounded steady, even to me. The judge glanced at Andrew. "Counsel," he said, tapping the file. "These charges are against him?" For the first time, Andrew looked a little off balance. "Yes, Your Honor," he said. "Our position is that Mr. Rivera exerted undue influence." "We'll see," the judge cut in, "but I am familiar with Mr. Rivera's work protecting elders from exploitation. Let's proceed carefully." You could feel the air change. My mother's mouth dropped open for a second before she closed it. Andrew did his opening, trying to paint me as a controlling caretaker. He said my parents had been shut out, that Manuel had been isolated and confused. My mother dabbed her eyes. My father shook his head sadly. Then it was Priya's turn. She did not raise her voice. She just walked the judge through the timeline. She showed my care logs, years of daily notes, visits, meds. She showed doctor letters confirming Manuel's mental capacity at the exact time he signed the will and trust. She showed texts where my parents canceled visits, asked only about money, or wrote that they were too busy unless paperwork was involved. Then came the video clips. The porch camera showing nurses, neighbors, me helping Manuel down the ramp, week after week. The rare short visits from my parents. The one where my mother stood on the step and said she didn't do diapers before leaving 10 minutes later. Finally, Priya called the trust officer. He explained the clause Manuel had added, that any heir who publicly accused me of exploitation without proof would lose their share, which would be donated to the scholarship fund Manuel named. Priya handed up screenshots of my parents' messages, their church comments, the lawsuit itself. Judge Keller read in silence, then set the pages down. "Petition denied," he said. "Will and trust upheld in full. Respect clause triggered. The petitioners forfeit any claim and will pay respondents' legal costs." The bailiff handed my parents the order as they sat frozen. I picked up my backpack, walked past them without a word, and stepped into the hallway just as my phone buzzed. A message from the trust officer. "Transfer completed. Manuel Ortiz Scholarship Fund is active." I put the phone in my pocket and kept walking.